Hey everyone. Okay, so let's talk stealth dyslexia. What does that mean? What does that look like? Could your child have it and maybe you aren't aware of it? The more I dig into it, and I've known about this for a while, but I was kind of reviewing stuff in preparation for this month where I'm talking all about stealth dyslexia. It's really shocking how many kids have stealth dyslexia and are often just labeled as weak readers. So, if you have a child who is a weak reader, and also if you have a child who maybe is not a weak reader, maybe they're told they're a good reader, but they have poor reading comprehension, or they need to pay attention better and focus and just, really apply themselves more when they're answering questions. Or if you have a child who is a really good reader, is told they have great reading comprehension, but has poor writing skills and they need to just write more details, they need to take, apply themselves more once again when they're writing so that they're writing with more care, then that could be, in fact, a case of stealth dyslexia, which I'm going to be getting into with different videos and trainings and so forth this week. So let me just tell you briefly about a story of a client I was working with a while back. We'll call him Reese, 17 years old, finally diagnosed with dyslexia, which was a huge shock to everybody in the family because Reese was a really good reader. And when I say good reader, he could decode and he could comprehend what he was reading. So, when we think of dyslexia, we think that means this person can't read. And as dad said, not that dad wasn't on board, but he was kind of confused of how can this be dyslexia? Dad's comment was kind of, if he can read, what's the problem? And how can it possibly be dyslexia? So allow me to explain. First of all, this kid was gifted beyond belief. He was in the gifted program, for a long time. Nobody would have suspected that this boy had dyslexia. And as he got into high school, things started to kind of slide a bit more, but it was always perceived as he was being lazy, he wasn't applying himself, and so forth. And so his self esteem is eroding because he feels like he's supposed to be smart. That's what he knows he is in certain instances, but he can't really shine in certain ways. And it's like there's this block for him to be able to truly perform at the level that he knows he can and others seem to think he can. And so what happened to Reese is he A, started thinking maybe I'm just a big fraud, and B, there's a lot of pressure as if he feels like he's going to disappoint people, that they're going to find out, oh, our son or whomever is in fact not gifted. So just to go back for a minute, stealth dyslexia as defined by Dr. Furnett and Dr. Brock-Eade, basically describe it as it is when an individual can read and comprehend. They're often very bright, typically often gifted in the case of stealth dyslexia, but they may struggle with oral reading, sounding out new long words. So that's a big marker right there, which I'm going to talk more about this week, or this month, I should say. And they often have difficulties with writing and spelling that can range from moderate to severe. And this was the case with Reese. He wrote very little, his penmanship was very poor, and because he was so smart, he was perceived as lazy. He was perceived as careless. I talked earlier this week on a post on Instagram about a girl I worked with who was perceived as entitled, spoiled, because, she can do this. She just doesn't think she needs to do the work because she's so darn smart. So if this sounds like your kid, this could in fact be, what's going on. With these kids who have stealth dyslexia like Reese, dysgraphia is often their biggest challenge. So they can get by with their reading, but the dysgraphia is really what starts to slow them down, particularly in the older grades, middle school, high school, and so forth. And unfortunately, their challenges are often not recognized as being true challenges related to a learning difficulty. Unfortunately, often these challenges are considered something within their control, right? Lazy, defiant, entitled, careless, all that type of stuff. So they have these above average IQs. You ask them orally or verbally to tell them about a topic that they've been studying, maybe in science class. They could tell you all about that topic. They're super, super smart. Teachers know it, kids see it, all that type of stuff. But get them to write it down, and it's like climbing Mount Everest. It's a whole other scenario. So when stealth dyslexia is present, it's most likely to be missed in primary, often even junior grades. And again, might get recognized in middle school, but might just be seen as like there's something not quite right, but often not enough to get a diagnosis. If it's recognized, it's more likely to be recognized in high school, sometime college, university. And sometimes, in many cases, there's adults who will come to me with a child who has dyslexia and say, I did have some difficulties, but I managed to get by. And often these people are the ones who have these like master's degrees or more and so forth. They're very driven, they're very smart, but they really struggled with certain aspects in language, whether it was reading, writing, or both. So when there is stealth dyslexia, they appear to read fluently. But they're actually relying on quite a few compensations when they are reading that go unnoticed by, typical people in education. So whether it's the homeschooling parent or person, whether it's in school and it's the teachers not seeing it. And what's happening is these kids typically have the standard thing that classic dyslexia, which is weak auditory and visual processing, but they use their superior oral language skills, their amazing problem solving skills. They have a high IQ, excellent contextual memory that we see among dyslexics, and they use those skills to read, which is why they're often very good at getting the gist of an idea of a story based on context and background knowledge, which is one of the zones of geniuses with dyslexia. So, other kids, I want to be clear, there's different kind of ways it can show up. So other kids with stealth dyslexia might be able to decode fluently. Some of them can comprehend really well. Others can decode fluently and comprehend, but then the writing and the output of getting their ideas on paper is where there's a real breakdown. So in classic dyslexia, as you know, these kids, if it's severe or even moderate, it can get noticed as early as kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, and so forth. If it's mild dyslexia, as you probably know, again, these kids can be, brushed off for quite a few years as just being weak readers. They try really hard. They're good kids often. And it's not till grade 4 or 5 and so forth that when they're no longer learning to read but reading to learn, that it becomes clear there's dyslexia, and then they get a diagnosis. I don't want to say a little too late, but definitely too late. It should have been noticed sooner. Stealth dyslexia can go on for years. It can go on for a whole life where there's no recognition that this person has an actual has dyslexia, because the definition of dyslexia is not someone who cannot read. It's numerous things that are used diagnostically to determine how they are breaking down words, where's their deficits in terms of, poor phonemic awareness, auditory processing, all of that type of stuff. And oftentimes poor visual processing goes into that as well. So in 2005, there was a study by Dr. Fumiko Hooft at the University of California. And what was determined is that stealth dyslexics have the same wiring as classic dyslexia. So we use the term stealth dyslexia in educational therapy and other fields and so forth. But if your child has, whether it's stealth dyslexia or dyslexia, it's all dyslexia. It's just that we call it stealth because it so often goes unnoticed. It can look differently, and that's why it gets missed. And so what this study found is that these people had the same wiring as a classic dyslexic in the brain, but they had heightened activity in the brain related to executive functioning, which is why they are more able to compensate and get by and fly under the radar. So this is what allows for their often decent or even really good reading comprehension, because they were relying on their problem-solving skills. And once again, other neurological and neuropsychological testing found the same thing: deficits with auditory and visual processing, as well as motor processing among stealth dyslexia, same as dyslexics. So what that boils down to is there could be deficits with auditory or visual processing or motor processing in the case of particular dysgraphia, but it's more mild. And so these kids can more easily compensate. And because they often have what we call twice exceptional, which I'm going to get into again in another video, is they have a high IQ. And so that's what allows them to compensate. And this is why it gets missed. So what I'm going to be talking about next time is why stealth dyslexia so often gets missed. How is it that schools don't screen for this? What are they using to assess? What needs to be determined instead? And the dysgraphia connection. So if you have a kid with dysgraphia, this is something you really want to tune into. There's definitely various reasons why someone can have dysgraphia. There's another reason I'm going to talk about another time, but it's not always stealth dyslexia, but this is definitely a big part of stealth dyslexia. So if you want to learn more about our programs and so forth, I'll put a link in the comment below to book a free clarity call to learn more about the Full Potential Academy. And then also you can grab our brain screening, which is on sale right now for $197. We've held over the sale an extra few weeks, and that allows you to have a one-on-one appointment with me, as well as getting a full picture of what's really going on in terms of the functional breakdown of why your child is struggling with the things they're struggling with, so that you can come up with an action plan that's integrative, that addresses the various root causes. So thanks for watching, everyone. Let me know, do you suspect your child has stealth dyslexia? Do you suspect you had it, or someone you know? And what has been your experience? Have a great day.